we'll consider first what we may call the academic orientation in theology. Then we'll look at the life orientation that some theologians have taken toward their discipline. Let's start with an academic orientation. On the one side, Aquinas and Hodge represent an academic orientation in theology. Their outlooks reflect the majority of Christian theologians' views. In simple terms, they define theology in ways that correspond to the etymology or linguistic background of the word itself. Theology derives from two Greek words, theos, meaning God, and logos, meaning doctrine or study. So, the etymology of the word suggests that theology is the doctrine or study of God. This academic understanding of theology characterizes the vast majority of formal theological works, both in the past and today. Of course, there's hardly a sincere Christian theologian who would say that merely studying about God and other topics in relation to God should be an end in itself. Faithful Christians affirm that theology is supposed to be applied to their lives in one way or another. But in this dominant, traditional outlook, application to the daily lives of believers is not seen as primary. Rather, it's a secondary enterprise, often called practical theology, that we do after we've settled scholarly, academic issues in formal theology. As a result, formal theology often can be performed with very little concern for ordinary living. It remains an area in which only a few academically gifted people can involve themselves to any significant degree. And a sort of culture of intellectual expertise develops in theology. Now, on the other side, rather than a tendency toward an academic orientation in theology, some theologians approach theology with a life orientation. Ames and Frame represent this important minority view in which applying theology to the practicalities of life isn't a secondary task. Rather, it's the essence of theological reflection in the Christian faith. Of course, throughout the centuries, there have been theologians who have seen theology as inextricably tied to the broader range of living as a believer. But in the past, relatively few leading theologians held this view. In recent decades, however, more and more Christian theologians have begun to reject the concept that theology should be concerned simply with intellectual matters. They've argued against formal theology as just an academic or conceptual basis for Christian living, but rather as a discipline that is deeply and essentially concerned with living for Christ.